where powerful stories of betrayal, justice, and redemption come to life. Follow along as a father figure shares gripping tales filled with wisdom, emotion, and unexpected twists. Sit back and experience revenge told with calm strength and unforgettable impact.
I decided to visit my wife's lover in the hospital and look him in the eye. When I opened the door to his room, I turned ghost pale at what I saw. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Bruce Kellerman, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew everything about my life. I thought I knew my wife Margaret, the woman I had shared 35 years with, the woman who made my coffee every morning and kissed my cheek before I left for work. I thought I understood the rhythm of our days, the comfortable silence of our evenings, the way she hummed while folding laundry on Sunday afternoons. I was wrong about everything. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. Margaret had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered, something she never did. The screen lit up with a message, and without thinking, I glanced over. The name that appeared made my stomach drop. David. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe David was a client at the real estate office where Margaret worked part-time, but deep down in that place where truth lives before we're ready to face it, I already knew. I scrolled up through their conversation, each message feeling like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. 3 months of exchanges, 3 months of "I miss you" and "when can we meet," and details about hotel rooms and stolen afternoons that made me physically sick. My Margaret. My wife of 35 years. The woman who still held my hand during movies, who worried when I was late coming home from my accounting office, who had stood by me through my father's death, my mother's long illness, the lean years when we struggled to pay the mortgage on this house, when she came downstairs 20 minutes later, hair still damp, wearing the blue robe I had bought her for Christmas. I was sitting at our kitchen table with her phone in front of me. "Bruce?" Her voice was cautious. "Why do you have my phone?" I looked up at her. This woman I thought I knew completely, and saw a stranger. "Who is David?" The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white against the wood. "Bruce, I can explain." 35 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. 35 years, Margaret. "And this is what you do?" She sank into the chair across from me, tears already streaming down her cheeks. But I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her, no instinct to reach across the table like I had done thousands of times before, just a cold, spreading numbness that started in my chest and worked its way through my entire body. "It's not what you think," she began, but I held up my hand. "Don't. Just don't lie to me anymore." The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the clock on the wall, the same clock we had received as a wedding gift from her parents. 35 years of mornings in this kitchen, and now it felt like a museum of a life that had never really existed. "How long?" I asked. 3 months, she whispered. "How old is he?" Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know before she answered. 28. 28. Younger than our daughter Sarah, young enough to be our son. The thought made bile rise in my throat. "Where do you meet him?" "Bruce, please." "Where?" My voice was sharper now, cutting through her tears like they meant nothing. And maybe they didn't. Maybe nothing she had ever shown me meant anything. "The Marriott on 5th Street, she said, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. The Marriott where we had celebrated our 20th anniversary, where we had renewed our vows 5 years ago, surrounded by our children and grandchildren, promising to love and cherish each other until death do us part. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 62 years in my knees, my back, the way my hands shook as I pushed the chair under the table. "I'm going to work," I said. "Bruce, we need to talk about this." "No," I said, not looking at her. "We needed to talk about this 3 months ago, before you decided to destroy our marriage." I walked to the front door, grabbed my jacket from the hook where it had hung every morning for 15 years, and stepped outside. The March air was cold and sharp, but it felt good against my skin. Real. Everything else felt like I was moving through water, like the world had shifted slightly off its axis, and nothing would ever line up quite right again. At the office, I sat at my desk staring at tax returns and financial statements, but the numbers blurred together. My secretary, Helen, asked if I was feeling well. I told her I was fine, but we both knew it was a lie. I had been lying to myself for months, maybe years. Had there been signs? Late nights at the office that weren't really at the office, new clothes I hadn't noticed her buying, changes in her routine, her mood, the way she touched me. The afternoon crawled by like torture. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be Margaret, but she didn't call. When 6 o'clock finally came, I drove home through streets that looked exactly the same as they had that morning, but felt completely foreign. Margaret was in the living room when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. She had been crying for hours. "I ended it," she said before I had even taken off my coat. "I called him and ended it." I looked at her sitting on our couch, surrounded by the photos of our life together. Our wedding day when she was 25 and I was 27, and we thought we had forever figured out. Pictures of our children as babies, as teenagers, at their own weddings. Grandchildren's school photos arranged carefully on the side table. "That doesn't change what Tom'd." "You did," I said. "I know." Her voice was barely audible. "I know it doesn't, but Bruce, I love you. I've always loved you. This was just, I don't know what it was, a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake." "A 3-month mistake." I sat down in my recliner, the same chair I had sat in every evening for 8 years, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Was I not enough? In all these years, was I not enough? No, that's not it. Then what? The question came out harsher than I intended, but I needed to understand. What did he give you that I couldn't? What did I do wrong? Margaret broke down then, sobbing in a way that shook her entire body. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're a good man, Bruce. You've always been a good man. I felt old, I felt invisible, and he made me feel young again, beautiful again. I know how pathetic that sounds." "It sounds selfish," I said. "It sounds like you threw away everything we built together because some kid made you feel good about yourself." The words hung in the air between us like poison. Margaret flinched as if I had hit her, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction from hurting her, no regret, just emptiness. That night I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Margaret cry through the thin walls, and wondered if anything about our life together had been real. Had she loved me when we got married? Or had I been convenient? Had she meant it when she said her vows, when she promised to forsake all others? 3 days passed in a strange, painful routine. Margaret tried to talk to me, to explain, to apologize. I went to work, came home, ate dinner in silence, and slept in the guest room. I felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life. On Friday afternoon, Helen knocked on my office door. "Mr. Kellerman, there's a call for you. The woman says it's about your wife." My heart stopped. Had Margaret done something desperate? I picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Mr. Kellerman, this is Rebecca from Mercy General Hospital. Your wife asked me to call you. There's been an accident." "Margaret?" The word came out strangled. "No, sir. Someone named David Morrison. He was in a car accident this morning. He's stable, but your wife is here and she's quite upset. She thought you should know." "David Morrison? Yeah. Her lover." Margaret was at the hospital with her lover. I thanked Rebecca and hung up the phone, my hands steady for the first time in days. Something had crystallized inside me, something cold and clear and determined. I was going to see this man. I was going to look him in the eye and understand what he had that was worth destroying my marriage for. I told Helen I was leaving for the day, got in my car and drove toward Mercy General Hospital. With each mile, I felt more resolved. I needed to see his face, needed to understand how a 28-year-old kid had managed to seduce my wife away from 35 years of marriage. The hospital parking garage was nearly full, but I found a spot on the 3rd level. As I walked toward the elevator, I realized I had no idea what I was going to say to him. What do you say to the man who has been sleeping with your wife? What questions do you ask when your entire life has been turned upside down? The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the sterile hallway and approached the nurse's station. "I'm looking for David Morrison," I said to the young nurse behind the counter. "Are you family?" I hesitated. "I'm Bruce Kellerman. I believe his friend called and asked me to come." The nurse checked her computer and nodded. "Room 412, down the hall and to your right." My legs felt unsteady as I walked down the corridor. Room 408, 409, 410, 411. Each step brought me closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I stood outside room 412 for several minutes, my hand on the door handle, gathering courage I didn't know I possessed. Behind this door was the man who had changed everything. The man my wife had chosen over me, over our family, over our history together. I took a deep breath, turned the handle, and pushed the door open. The drive to Mercy General felt like the longest 23 minutes of my life. Every red light, every slow-moving car ahead of me felt like the universe conspiring to give me more time to think, more time to imagine what I would find when I finally faced him. David Morrison. Even his name felt foreign in my mind. I had spent the last 3 days trying to picture him, trying to understand what kind of man could look at a married woman and decide she was worth pursuing. Was he handsome in that effortless way young men often are? Was he charming, funny, everything I wasn't anymore? I turned onto Highland Avenue, passing the coffee shop where Margaret and I used to go every Saturday morning. We had our regular table by the window where she would order a vanilla latte and I would get black coffee, and we would read different sections of the newspaper, occasionally sharing interesting articles with each other. Simple, comfortable, real, or at least I had thought it was real. Had she been thinking about him during those Saturday mornings? Had she been comparing my gray hair to his youth, my expanding waistline to whatever 28-year-old body he possessed? The thought made my grip tighten on the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The radio was playing some old song from the 80s, something Margaret and I had danced to at our wedding reception. I reached over and turned it off, unable to bear the memories it stirred up. Everything reminded me of her now, of us, of the life I had thought we were building together. At a red light 2 blocks from the hospital, I found myself staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. When had I gotten so old? The man looking back at me had deep lines around his eyes, gray stubble that made him look tired, shoulders that seemed permanently hunched from years of sitting at a desk. Was this what Margaret saw when she looked at me now? Was this why she had turned to someone else? The light changed and I drove forward, but the image stayed with me. I remembered being 28, remembered feeling like I could conquer the world, like nothing could stop me. I had been full of ambition then, working long hours to build the accounting practice that had supported our family for 3 decades. Margaret had been proud of me, or at least she had seemed to be. She would brag to her friends about how hard I worked, how dedicated I was to providing for our family. But somewhere along the way, dedicated had become boring. Reliable had become predictable. The man she had fallen in love with had turned into the man she took for granted. I pulled into the hospital parking garage, my hands trembling slightly as I took the ticket from the machine. The garage smelled like exhaust and disinfectant, sounds echoing off the concrete walls in a way that made everything seem hollow and unreal. Finding a parking space took longer than it should have. My mind kept wandering, replaying conversations with Margaret from the past few months, looking for clues I had missed. Had she been distant? Had she stopped asking about my day, stopped sharing details about hers? I couldn't remember the last time we had really talked about anything meaningful. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed other visitors heading to see their loved ones. A woman carrying flowers and looking anxious, an elderly man moving slowly with a walker, determination etched on his face. A young couple holding hands, the woman crying softly while the man whispered reassurances. All of them here for normal reasons, visiting people they cared about who were hurt or sick. I was here to confront my wife's lover. The elevator ride to the 4th floor gave me too much time to think. What was I actually hoping to accomplish? Did I think seeing him would help me understand Margaret's choices? Did I expect him to apologize, to explain himself, to somehow make sense of the mess my life had become? The truth was, I didn't know what I expected. I just knew I needed to see him with my own eyes. I needed to understand what had been worth throwing away 35 years of marriage for. The elevator dinged softly as we reached the 4th floor. The doors opened onto a typical hospital corridor, fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly green, the smell of antiseptic trying to mask other, less pleasant odors, the distant sound of monitors beeping and nurses talking in low voices. I approached the nurses' station, my mouth dry and my heart pounding harder than it had in years. The young nurse behind the counter looked up at me with professional concern. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for David Morrison," I managed to say, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Are you family?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Family. No, I wasn't family. I was the husband of the woman who was probably sitting by his bedside right now, holding his hand, whispering comfort into his ear the way she used to do for me when I was sick. "I'm Bruce Kellerman," I said. "I believe his friend called and asked me to come." The nurse typed something into her computer, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or suspicion. "Room 412, she said. "Down the hall and to your right." I thanked her and turned toward the corridor, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. Each step felt enormous, like I was walking toward the edge of a cliff. Room 406, 407, 408. The numbers passed by in a blur as I tried to prepare myself for whatever I was about to see. What if Margaret was in there with him? What if I walked in on some intimate scene that would scar me forever? What if seeing them together confirmed every terrible thought that had been eating away at me for the past 3 days? Room 409, 410, 411. My pace slowed involuntarily. Part of me wanted to turn around, to go home and pretend none of this was happening. I could go back to my comfortable denial, my assumption that my marriage was solid even if it wasn't passionate, that Margaret and I would grow old together despite whatever midlife crisis she was going through. But I couldn't. Not anymore. The discovery of those text messages had shattered something inside me that couldn't be put back together. I needed to see this through, needed to understand what I was really up against. I stopped outside room 412 and stared at the door. Behind it was the man who had been intimate with my wife, who had whispered things to her that I would never know, who had touched her in ways that belonged to me. The thought made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to stay calm. I could hear voices from inside the room, but I couldn't make out the words. Was Margaret in there? Was she comforting him, telling him how sorry she was that he was hurt, how much she wished she could take his pain away? My hand reached for the door handle, then stopped. What if this was a mistake? What if confronting him would only make everything worse? What if seeing him would confirm that he was everything I wasn't? Young, handsome, exciting, worth destroying a marriage for. But I had come this far. I had driven across town, parked in this sterile garage, taken the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked down this endless hallway. I couldn't turn back now. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water, and wrapped my fingers around the door handle. The metal felt cold against my palm, solid and real in a way that nothing else had felt for days. This was it. Whatever was behind this door would change everything, would either give me the closure I needed or destroy what little peace of mind I had left. Either way, I would finally have answers. I turned the handle slowly, feeling the mechanism click as it disengaged. The door swung open just a crack, and I could see a sliver of the room beyond. White walls, medical equipment, the foot of a hospital bed. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone in the hospital could hear it. What I saw when I looked at the man in the bed made the world tilt on its axis. My vision blurred, my knees buckled, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. It couldn't be possible. But there was no denying what I was seeing, no rationalizing it away or pretending I was mistaken. The young man lying unconscious in the hospital bed, the man my wife had been having an affair with for the past 3 months, had my face. I stood frozen in the doorway of room 412, my hand still gripping the frame so tightly that my knuckles had gone completely white. The young man in the hospital bed had my nose, my jawline, the same cleft in his chin that I had inherited from my father and had always been self-conscious about. His hair was dark brown, the same color mine had been at his age, and even unconscious, his face held the same expression I made when I was concentrating. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "Sir, are you all right?" I turned to see a nurse entering the room behind me, her face creased with concern. She was middle-aged, probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and the tired look of someone who had worked too many double shifts. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice sounding like it was coming from very far away. "I think there's been some mistake. I'm looking for David Morrison." The nurse checked the chart in her hands. "This is David Morrison. Are you family? I have to say the resemblance is remarkable. Are you his father?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my legs give out and had to sit down hard in the visitor's chair beside the bed. His father. Was I his father? I'm not sure, I whispered, staring at the young man's face. Now that I was closer, the resemblance was even more striking. He had my hands, too, long fingers with the same slight curve to the pinky that had made it impossible for me to wear my wedding ring on that finger. "Well, you certainly could be," the nurse said gently. "I'm Linda, by the way. I've been taking care of David since he was brought in yesterday morning. He was in a pretty bad car accident, but he's stable now. The doctors expect him to wake up within the next day or two." "His injuries?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. Nothing made sense anymore. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a broken wrist. He was lucky, really. The car was totaled, but he was wearing his seatbelt. Linda checked his IV and made notes on his chart. "Have you been in touch with his emergency contact?" "Margaret Kellerman? She was here earlier but had to leave for a family emergency." My heart stopped. Margaret Kellerman is his emergency contact? "Yes, she's listed as his, well, it just says close family friend on the paperwork, but she seemed very upset. She'll be relieved to know you're here." Linda paused, studying my face. "You really do look exactly like him. It's uncanny." After Linda left, I sat in silence, staring at this young man who might be my son. My son. The word felt foreign and impossible, but I couldn't deny what I was seeing. The evidence was literally lying unconscious in front of me. I tried to do the math in my head. David was 28, which meant he would have been born in 1995. Margaret and I had been married for 7 years by then, but there had been that brief separation when Sarah was 3. We had both been young and stupid, dealing with the stress of new parenthood and financial pressure. I had moved out for 2 months, staying in a furnished apartment across town, while we tried to figure out if our marriage was worth saving. During those 2 months, we had each dated other people. I had gone out with a woman named Patricia from my office. Nothing serious, just dinner and movies and trying to convince myself I was ready to move on. Margaret had mentioned seeing someone too, but we had agreed not to discuss the details when we got back together. But what if it had been more than just casual dating for Margaret? What if she had gotten pregnant? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Margaret's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. "Margaret," I said after the beep, "I'm at the hospital. I'm in David's room. We need to talk. Now." I hung up and stared at David's face again, looking for any feature that might belong to someone else, any sign that I was wrong about what I was seeing. But there was nothing. He was like looking at a photograph of myself from 30 years ago. My phone rang 15 minutes later. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and I answered before the second ring. "Bruce." Her voice was shaky, frightened. "Is he my son?" The silence that followed was answer enough, but I needed to hear her say it. "Margaret, is David my son?" "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair, feeling like I was falling through space. "How long have you known?" "Since the day he was born." "And you never told me." "How could I? We had just gotten back together. You were so happy about working things out, so excited about being a family again, I couldn't destroy that. So you decided to lie to me for 28 years instead. Bruce, please. Does he know? Another long pause. Yes. He's known since he was 18. His adoptive father told him the truth before he died. Adoptive father. Of course. Margaret would have had to give him up, would have had to pretend he didn't exist, so we could rebuild our marriage. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He sought you out, didn't he? I said, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. That's how this whole thing started. He found you. Yes, about 6 months ago, he wanted to meet me, to understand why I gave him up. It was supposed to be just coffee, just one conversation, but she trailed off. But you started sleeping with him instead. It wasn't like that. It wasn't supposed to happen. We were just talking, and he was so angry, so hurt about being given away. And he reminded me so much of you when you were young, the way you used to look at me, the way you used to make me feel important and beautiful and... Stop. I couldn't listen to anymore. The woman I had loved for 35 years had been having an affair with our son who didn't know I was his father, our son who had been raised by another family while I lived in ignorance just 20 miles away. Does he know about me? I asked. Does he know I'm his biological father? No, I never told him your name. He knows his father was someone I was seeing during our separation, but I never gave him any details. I couldn't risk him finding you. Risk him finding me. As if having a relationship with his actual father would have been some kind of catastrophe. I looked at David lying in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connected to his unconscious body, and felt a rage so pure and devastating that it took my breath away. This young man was my son, and I had missed everything. His first steps, his first words, his first day of school, teaching him to drive, helping him with homework, watching him graduate, being there when he needed a father. All of it stolen from me by the woman I had trusted with my entire life. Bruce, are you still there? I'm here. What are you going to do? I stared at my son's face, memorizing every detail I had been denied the chance to watch develop over the years. I don't know yet. Please don't tell him, please. It would destroy him. Destroy him or destroy you? Both, probably, but mostly him. He's been through so much already, Bruce. Finding out that we've been... She couldn't finish the sentence. That you've been sleeping with your own son. God, when you say it like that, that's what it is, Margaret. That's exactly what it is. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet hospital room, listening to the steady beep of David's heart monitor. My son's heart monitor. The son I had never known existed, who had been raised by strangers while his biological parents lived their comfortable lie just a few miles away. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Linda poked her head in. Mr. Kellerman, I'm sorry to bother you, but visiting hours are almost over. You're welcome to stay a little longer if you'd like, but I wanted to let you know. Thank you, I said. Linda, can I ask you something? Of course. How long has Margaret been coming to visit him? Since yesterday, when he was admitted. She was here most of the night and again this morning until she got that family emergency call. Linda hesitated. She seemed very close to him. I assumed they were related, but the paperwork was a little unclear. What did she tell you about their relationship? Just that she was a close family friend who had known him since he was born. She was very emotional, kept saying it was her fault somehow. Linda studied my face carefully. Is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, I said. Thank you, Linda. You've been very helpful. After she left, I sat with David for another hour, watching him breathe, studying his features, trying to imagine what kind of person he had become. Was he kind? Was he smart? Did he have my stubborn streak, my tendency to overthink everything? Did he like baseball the way I had at his age? Did he have Margaret's laugh? As the sun set outside the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room, I realized I was facing an impossible choice. I could tell David the truth when he woke up, could claim my place as his father and try to build some kind of relationship with him. But that would mean revealing that he had been having an affair with his own biological mother, a truth that might genuinely destroy him. Or I could stay silent, could let him go on believing that Margaret was just a family friend, could protect him from a truth that might be too devastating to bear. But that would mean walking away from my only chance to know my son, to be part of his life in any meaningful way. Either choice felt like it would destroy someone. The question was whether I was willing to sacrifice my own need for a relationship with David to protect his sanity. I looked at his peaceful face one more time, then stood up and walked to the window. The parking lot below was nearly empty now, just a few cars scattered under the harsh fluorescent lights. Somewhere out there, Margaret was probably sitting in her car or at home, waiting for me to decide what to do with the truth that could unravel everything. David would wake up tomorrow or the next day, expecting to go back to his life, never knowing that his world had already been turned completely upside down. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 28 years of lies settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat I couldn't remove. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my home office, the same room where I had spent countless evenings working on tax returns and financial reports, staring at the wall and trying to process what I had learned. Every few minutes I would pick up my phone to call Margaret, then set it down again without dialing. What was there left to say? By morning, I had made my decision. I needed to see her face when we talked about this. I needed to understand how she had lived with this secret for nearly 3 decades, how she had looked me in the eye every day knowing that my son was out there somewhere, growing up without me. Margaret was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, still in her robe, holding a cup of coffee with shaking hands. She looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. "How long have you been up?" I asked, pouring myself coffee from the pot she had made. "I never went to bed." Her voice was hoarse. "I kept waiting for you to come home." I needed time to think. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, the same granite countertop where we had eaten breakfast together for 15 years, where we had wrapped Christmas presents and helped our grandchildren with art projects and lived out the ordinary moments of what I had thought was an honest marriage. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning." Margaret set down her coffee cup and wrapped her arms around herself. "You remember when we separated? You had moved into that apartment on Maple Street and I was here with Sarah. I was so angry at you, Bruce, so hurt and lonely. So you started seeing someone." I met him at the grocery store. He was a manager there, worked nights mostly. His name was Tom Morrison. He was kind to me when I felt like the world was falling apart. I remembered those 2 months as the darkest period of our marriage. We had been so young, so overwhelmed by the responsibility of parenthood and the pressure of trying to make ends meet on my starting salary. I had felt like a failure as a husband and father, and moving out had seemed like the only way to give us both space to figure out what we wanted. "How long were you together?" "Just those 2 months. It wasn't love, Bruce, it was just comfort. Someone who listened to me complain about my life and told me I deserved better." Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. "When you called and said you wanted to come home, wanted to work things out, I ended it with Tom immediately. I thought it was over. But you were pregnant. I found out 3 weeks after you moved back in. We were so happy, Bruce. You kept talking about how we were going to be stronger than ever, how we had learned from our mistakes. I couldn't destroy that. So you decided to lie instead. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. If I told you, you might leave again. If I told Tom, he might want to be involved, and that would complicate everything. I thought maybe I could just handle it on my own. I tried to imagine 25-year-old Margaret, scared and alone, carrying my son while pretending everything was fine. Despite my anger, I felt a stab of sympathy for the impossible position she had been in. "What did you tell Tom?" "Nothing at first. I avoided him completely, but when I started showing, I had to say something. I told him I was pregnant, but that it wasn't his, that it was yours from before our separation. He believed me." And after David was born? Margaret's composure finally cracked, and she started crying in earnest. I gave birth at St. Mary's, the hospital across town where nobody knew us. I told you I was visiting my sister in Phoenix for 2 weeks, remember? You were so busy with work you didn't question it. I did remember. Margaret had seemed different when she came back from that trip. Quieter, sadder. I had assumed it was because she missed her sister who had just moved to Arizona. The truth was so much worse than anything I could have imagined. I held him for 1 day, she continued through her tears. 1 day, Bruce. He was so beautiful, so perfect. He had your eyes, your nose. And I had to give him to strangers and pretend he didn't exist. To Tom. Tom and his wife had been trying to have children for years. When I told him the truth about the pregnancy, that the baby was his, he was overjoyed. They adopted David privately, gave him a good home, a good life. I thought I was doing the right thing. The cruelty of it was staggering. Tom Morrison had raised my son, believing David was his own biological child. David had grown up with a father who loved him while I remained oblivious to his existence, and Margaret had orchestrated all of it, had lived with this massive deception for nearly 3 decades. When did David find out the truth? When he was 18. Tom was dying of cancer, and he wanted David to know about his adoption before he passed. He told him that his birth mother was a young woman named Margaret, who had been in a difficult situation. He gave David the few details he had. And David came looking for you. Not right away. He waited almost 10 years. He said he needed time to process it, to decide if he really wanted to find me. When he finally tracked me down 6 months ago, I almost didn't agree to meet him. But you did. He was so angry, Bruce, so full of hurt and questions I couldn't answer. He wanted to know why I gave him up, why I never tried to contact him, whether I ever thought about him. And seeing him was like looking at you 30 years ago. The resemblance was so strong it took my breath away. I understood now why Margaret had been drawn to David, but understanding didn't make it less horrifying. So you decided to sleep with him. It didn't happen right away. We met for coffee a few times, then dinner. He was trying to understand his history, and I was trying to make up for 30 years of guilt. But he was so charming, so attentive. He made me feel young again, important again, and he reminded me so much of you when we first met. He is me, I said, my voice rising. He's my son, Margaret. You were having an affair with our son. I know how it sounds. Do you? Do you really understand what you've done? You've traumatized a young man who was already struggling with abandonment issues. You've destroyed our marriage, and you've stolen 28 years of my relationship with my only son. Margaret flinched as if I had hit her. He's not your only son. You have Michael. Michael is our daughter Sarah's husband, not my son. You know what I meant. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Margaret's quiet crying. I looked around the room at the photos on the refrigerator, the coffee mugs we had bought on various vacations, the everyday artifacts of a life built on lies. Does David know who his biological father is? No, I never told him your name. He knows his birth father was someone I was seeing during my separation, but that's all. And he doesn't know you're married. Margaret's face went even paler. What do you mean? I mean, does he know about me? Does he know you have a husband? I told him I was divorced. The hits just kept coming. Not only had Margaret been having an affair with our son, but she had lied to him about her marital status as well. The web of deception was so complex, so multi-layered, that I wondered how she had kept track of all the lies. So in his mind, he's been dating a divorced woman old enough to be his mother. I was going to tell him the truth eventually. I just needed more time to figure out how. Time to figure out how to tell your lover that you're married to his biological father? Don't say it like that. That's what it is, Margaret. That's exactly what happened here. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at our backyard, where we had hosted countless barbecues and birthday parties over the years, where our grandchildren played on the swing set I had built myself, where Margaret and I had talked about growing old together, about the quiet life we would have when the chaos of raising children was behind us, all of it based on a lie that had taken 30 years to unravel. He's going to wake up soon, I said without turning around. I know. And he's going to expect you to visit him. Bruce, I ended it with him. I told you that. I'm not going back to the hospital. I turned to face her. Yes, you are. You're going to go see him and you're going to tell him the truth. I can't. It would destroy him. He deserves to know. He deserves to understand why his life has been one lie after another. And what about you? Are you going to tell him you're his father? I had been wrestling with that question all night, and I still didn't have an answer. Part of me wanted nothing more than to walk into that hospital room and claim my son, to try to build some kind of relationship with him despite the impossible circumstances. But the rational part of me knew that learning he had been sleeping with his biological mother might be more than David could handle. I don't know yet, I said honestly. If you tell him, it will ruin his life. He'll never get over the shame of it. And if I don't tell him, I'll never get to know my son. I'll never get to be his father. You gave up that right when you walked out during our separation. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I gave up that right? I didn't even know he existed. You made that choice for me, Margaret. You decided I didn't deserve to know about my own child. I was trying to protect our marriage. You were protecting yourself. You were covering up your affair, and you didn't care who got hurt in the process. Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. I can't do this right now. You don't get to run away from this, not anymore. You've been running from the truth for 28 years, and look where it's gotten us. But she was already walking toward the door, grabbing her car keys from the hook by the garage entrance. Where are you going? I called after her. To the hospital, she said without turning around. Someone needs to be there when David wakes up. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the wreckage of everything I had thought I knew about my life. Through the window, I watched her back out of the driveway and disappear down the street, heading toward a confrontation that would change all of our lives forever. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to process the magnitude of what lay ahead. In a few hours, David would wake up, and the complicated dance of deception that had kept our lives stable for nearly 3 decades would finally come to an end. The question was whether any of us would survive the truth. I waited 2 hours before following Margaret to the hospital. I told myself I needed time to think, to prepare for whatever confrontation awaited us, but the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of seeing David awake, terrified of looking into his eyes and seeing my own face staring back at me, terrified of the choice I would have to make between protecting him and claiming my right to be his father. The drive to Mercy General felt different this time. Yesterday, I had been going to confront my wife's lover. Today, I was going to see my son for the first time as his father, even if he would never know it. The elevator to the 4th floor seemed to move in slow motion. When the doors opened, I could hear voices coming from the direction of David's room. Margaret's voice, strained and emotional. A male voice I didn't recognize. Weak, but animated. David was awake. I approached room 412 slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the nurses could hear it from their station. The door was partially open, and I could see Margaret sitting in the chair beside the bed, her face streaked with tears. David was propped up against pillows, his left wrist in a cast, looking pale but alert. "I don't understand," he was saying as I reached the doorway. "What do you mean you can't see me anymore? What happened? Did I do something wrong?" "No, David. You didn't do anything wrong. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Yesterday you were telling me you cared about me, and now you're trying to break up with me while I'm in a hospital bed. That's pretty cold, Margaret." I stepped into the doorway, and both of them looked up at me. David's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. Margaret's face went completely white. "Who's this?" David asked, his eyes moving between Margaret and me. Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came out. I could see her struggling, trying to find a way to explain my presence without revealing the truth. "I'm Bruce," I said, stepping fully into the room. "I'm Margaret's husband." The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at me, then at Margaret, then back at me, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and finally devastation. "Husband." His voice was barely a whisper. "You're married?" Margaret nodded, unable to speak. How long? 35 years, I said when Margaret didn't answer. David's face went gray. He looked like he might be sick. 35 years, Jesus Christ, Margaret, you're married. You've been married this whole time and you never told me. I wanted to, Margaret said, her voice breaking. I tried to find a way to explain. Explain what? That you're a cheating wife? That I'm the other man? David tried to sit up straighter, wincing from the pain in his ribs. Do you have any idea what this does to me? My whole life, I've been abandoned by people who were supposed to care about me. My birth mother gave me away, my adoptive father died, and now I find out that the first woman I've cared about in years is married and has been lying to me about everything. His words hit me like physical blows. My birth mother gave me away. He had no idea he was talking about Margaret, no idea that his birth mother was the same woman who had been deceiving him for months. David, please, Margaret started. No? Don't, I can't hear any more lies. David's eyes filled with tears and he turned away from her. I want you to leave, both of you. I never want to see you again. David, get out. His voice was stronger now, filled with pain and rage. Get out of my room. Margaret stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. She looked at David one more time, then walked past me toward the door. I didn't follow her immediately. I stood there looking at my son, memorizing his face, wondering if this would be the last time I would ever see him. I'm sorry, I said quietly. David looked up at me, surprised. Why are you apologizing? You're the victim here, too. I'm sorry you've been hurt. You didn't deserve any of this. Something in my tone must have reached him because his expression softened slightly. How long have you known? About us, I mean. 3 days? That must have been quite a shock. Yes, it was. David studied my face carefully. You look familiar. Have we met before? My heart stopped. Even drugged and injured, he could sense the connection between us. No, we've never met. Huh, I could swear. He shook his head. Maybe it's the concussion. Everything's a little fuzzy. The doctor said that's normal. It should clear up as you heal. I hope so. I need to be able to think clearly so I can figure out what the hell I'm going to do now. David leaned back against his pillows, suddenly looking exhausted. My whole life is a mess. I came to this city looking for answers about my birth mother, and instead I ended up having an affair with a married woman old enough to be my mother. How screwed up is that? The irony was so devastating I had to grip the door frame to keep from falling over. If only he knew how accurate his assessment really was. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure. Your birth mother. You said you came here looking for answers about her. Did you find what you were looking for? David's expression darkened. Some. Not all. I know her name was Margaret, which is probably why I was drawn to. He gestured toward the hallway where his Margaret had disappeared. I know she was young when she had me, that she was in some kind of difficult situation. I know she gave me up because she thought it was best for everyone involved. Do you resent her for that decision? I used to. I spent my teenage years hating her, imagining all the ways I would tell her off if I ever found her. But as I got older, I started to understand that maybe she really was doing what she thought was best. David looked out the window, his voice growing quiet. I still want to meet her someday, though. I want to understand why she made the choices she did. I want to know if she ever thinks about me. Every day, I thought, she thinks about you every day, and the guilt of giving you up is part of what drove her to make such destructive choices when you found her again. I hope you get that chance, I said. Yeah, me too. David closed his eyes. I'm pretty tired. I think I need to sleep now. Of course, I'll let you rest. I was almost to the door when David called my name. Bruce? Yes? I'm sorry about your wife. About what we did, I didn't know she was married, but that doesn't make it right. You seem like a decent guy, and you didn't deserve this. Thank you for saying that. Are you going to try to work things out with her? I thought about it for a moment. I don't know yet. This isn't the kind of thing you just forgive and forget. No, I suppose it isn't. David opened his eyes and looked at me. Can I give you some advice? From someone who's spent most of his life dealing with abandonment and betrayal. Sure. Don't let this turn you bitter. Don't let what she did poison the rest of your life. You seem like you have a good heart. Don't let her take that away from you. The wisdom in his words, the maturity and insight he showed despite his own pain, made me proud in a way I had never expected to feel. This was my son, and despite everything that had happened to him, despite all the lies and abandonment he had endured, he was a good man. I'll try to remember that, I said. Good luck, Bruce. I hope things work out for you. I left the hospital with tears in my eyes and a decision weighing heavily on my heart. In the parking garage, I found Margaret sitting in her car, sobbing into her hands. I got into the passenger seat without saying anything. For several minutes, we just sat there in the fluorescent-lit garage, both of us crying for different reasons. He hates me, Margaret finally said. He's hurt. There's a difference. I've ruined everything. His life, our marriage, my relationship with him, everything. You made choices, Margaret. This is the consequence of those choices. Are you going to tell him about being his father? I had been asking myself that question for the past hour, and I finally had an answer. No. Margaret looked up at me, surprised. Why not? Because he's been through enough. Because learning that he was sleeping with his biological mother might be more than he can handle. Because sometimes the truth is too cruel to share. But that means you'll never get to know him. You'll never get to be his father. I'll never get to be his father anyway, Margaret. Tom Morrison was his father. Tom raised him, loved him, was there for him when he needed guidance and support. I missed that opportunity 28 years ago, and it's too late to get it back. Because of me. Because of both of us, because we were too young and scared to handle our problems like adults, because we let pride and fear drive us apart instead of working together. I looked at her tear-stained face, this woman I had loved for so long. But mostly because you chose to lie instead of trust me with the truth. I was trying to protect our marriage. You were protecting yourself. And I understand that, Margaret, I really do. You were young and scared and in an impossible situation. But the lies destroyed more than the truth ever could have. We drove home in separate cars, and when we got to the house, Margaret went upstairs to pack a bag. She was going to stay with her sister for a while, she said. We both needed time to think about what came next. That night, I sat in my office staring at a legal pad where I had started to write a letter to David 3 different times. Each time, I had gotten a few sentences in before crumpling it up and throwing it away. What could I possibly say to him that would make any of this better? Finally, around midnight, I managed to write something that felt honest. David, I know you never want to see Margaret again, and I understand why. What happened between you was wrong on many levels, and you have every right to be angry. But I wanted you to know that your birth mother, whoever she is, loves you more than you could possibly imagine. Sometimes people make terrible choices when they're trying to protect the people they love. Sometimes those choices hurt everyone involved, including themselves. I hope you find the peace and happiness you deserve. You're a good man, and you deserve better than the pain you've been carrying. Take care of yourself. Bruce. I sealed the letter in an envelope and addressed it to David Morrison at the hospital. I would mail it tomorrow, and then I would try to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been built on lies for nearly 30 years. Outside my office window, the street was quiet and dark. Somewhere out there, David was sleeping in a hospital bed, alone and heartbroken. Somewhere else, Margaret was lying awake in her sister's guest room, wondering if her marriage could survive what she had done. And here I was, caught between my love for a woman who had betrayed me and my love for a son who would never know I existed. For the first time in my adult life, I had no idea what came next. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment across town, reading the morning paper with my coffee when I saw David's name in the local business section. The headline read, "Local Marketing Executive Launches Nonprofit for Adoption Support." There was a photo of him cutting a ribbon outside a small office building, smiling genuinely for the first time since I had known he existed. I read the article twice, Learning about the organization he had started to help adoptees navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges of searching for birth parents. He had partnered with several local agencies and was already helping dozens of people find closure and healing. The article mentioned that he had been inspired by his own journey of searching for his biological family. I cut out the article and put it in the folder I had been keeping about David's life. Over the past 6 months, I had quietly followed his recovery and returned to normalcy. I knew he had left his job at the marketing firm downtown and started freelancing. I knew he had moved to a new apartment on the other side of the city. I knew he had started seeing a therapist to help him process his abandonment issues and the trauma of discovering Margaret's deception. I had never contacted him directly, but I had been watching from a distance like some kind of guardian angel he would never know existed. It was the only way I could be part of his life without causing him more pain. Margaret and I had divorced quietly 4 months after the hospital incident. She had moved to Phoenix to live with her sister permanently, unable to face the memories that surrounded her in our hometown. We had spoken only through lawyers, dividing up 35 years of accumulated life with the cold efficiency of legal documents. She had left me a letter on the day she moved out, apologizing again for everything that had happened and asking me to forgive her someday. I had read it once and then put it away in the same folder with David's information. Maybe someday I would be able to forgive her, but that day hadn't come yet. The house had been too full of memories, so I had sold it and moved into this one-bedroom apartment that overlooked the river. It was quiet and clean and had no history attached to it. I had kept only the essentials, my books, my clothes, a few pieces of furniture that had belonged to my parents. Everything else from my old life had been donated or thrown away. I was learning to live alone for the first time since I was 27 years old. Some days it was peaceful, other days it was lonely in a way that made my chest ache. But it was honest, which was something my old life had never been. My daughter Sarah called every Sunday, still trying to understand how her parents' marriage had ended so suddenly and completely. I had told her only that her mother and I had grown apart, that we wanted different things from life. She didn't need to know about David, didn't need to know she had a half-brother she would never meet. Some truths were too complicated to share, even with your children. The divorce had been final for 2 months when I got an unexpected phone call at work. Helen transferred the call with a puzzled expression. "It's a young man," she said. "Says his name is David Morrison and that you knew his friend." My heart stopped. David was calling me. I had no idea why, but I took the call anyway. "Bruce, this is David. David Morrison. We met at the hospital a few months ago." "I remember. How are you doing?" "Better, thanks. Listen, I hope this isn't weird, but I wanted to call and thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For the letter you sent me at the hospital. I got it right before I was discharged, and it meant a lot to me. It helped me understand some things I had been struggling with. I had forgotten about that letter, written in the middle of the night when I was trying to find some way to reach out to him without revealing the truth. I'm glad it helped." "Can I ask you something? Why did you write it? I mean, I was the guy who was sleeping with your wife. Most people in your situation would have wanted to punch me, not offer me comfort." I thought carefully about how to answer, because you didn't know she was married, because you were a victim in this situation too, because... I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Because you seemed like someone who deserved kindness instead of more pain." "That's incredibly generous of you. I don't think I would have been that understanding if our roles were reversed." "Maybe you would have. Maybe you're a better person than you think you are." There was a long pause. "I wanted you to know that I started a nonprofit to help other adoptees deal with some of the issues I've been working through. That letter you wrote, about birth parents sometimes making choices to protect the people they love, it helped me see my own situation differently. I read about your organization in the paper. It sounds like important work." "It is. And I wanted to thank you because your perspective helped me find a way to channel my anger into something positive. Instead of just being bitter about being given up for adoption, I'm trying to help other people find peace with their own stories." Pride swelled in my chest, so strong it almost took my breath away. This was my son, taking his pain and turning it into a way to help others. This was the man I had helped create, even if I would never get to claim credit for it. That's wonderful, David. Really wonderful. There's something else. I know this might sound strange, but would you like to have coffee sometime? I feel like I owe you a conversation that doesn't involve hospital rooms and family drama. Every instinct I had screamed yes. I wanted nothing more than to sit across from my son and learn about his life, his dreams, his thoughts on everything from politics to baseball. But I also knew it was dangerous territory. The more time I spent with him, the harder it would be to keep the truth to myself. I appreciate the invitation, I said carefully, but I think it's probably better if we don't. Too many complicated memories tied up in how we met. I understand. But Bruce? Yes? If you ever change your mind, I'd like that. You seem like someone I'd enjoy getting to know better. If only he knew how much I would enjoy getting to know him too. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the city where my son was building a new life. He was 28 years old, the same age I had been when Margaret and I reconciled and unknowingly sealed his fate. He was starting a business, helping people, making a difference in the world. He was everything I could have hoped for in a son, and he would never know I was his father. Over the following months, I continued to follow David's progress from a distance. His nonprofit grew rapidly, attracting funding from several major foundations and expanding to serve the entire metro area. He was featured in magazines and invited to speak at conferences about adoption, trauma, and healing. He even started a blog about his own journey that attracted thousands of readers. Through his public writing, I learned pieces of his story that I had never known. He wrote about Tom Morrison with deep love and respect, calling him the best father a boy could ask for. He wrote about the complicated grief of losing an adoptive parent while still searching for biological ones. He wrote about learning to separate his worth as a person from the circumstances of his birth. Reading his words was like getting to know my son through a window. I couldn't touch or interact, but I could observe and admire and feel proud of the man he had become, despite all the pain he had endured. 1 year after the hospital incident, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Sarah was getting remarried to a man named Michael, someone she had met at David's nonprofit where she had started volunteering. The connection made my heart race until I realized it was just a coincidence. David had hundreds of volunteers, and Sarah had no idea about our family connection. At the wedding, I watched Sarah dance with her new husband and felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy for her happiness, sadness that her mother wasn't there to see it, and a strange sort of peace that came from knowing that David's work had indirectly brought love into my daughter's life. After the reception, as I was walking to my car, I saw a familiar figure across the parking lot. David was there, probably attending as a representative of his organization. He was talking to a group of people, gesturing animatedly about something that had made them all laugh. For a moment, I considered walking over to him. I could congratulate him on his organization's success, maybe even introduce him to Sarah as her father. But then I remembered the choice I had made a year ago, the decision to protect his peace of mind over my own desire for a relationship. Instead, I got in my car and drove home to my quiet apartment, carrying the secret of his identity like a weight I would bear for the rest of my life. 2 years after the divorce, I met Ellen at a grief support group. She had lost her husband to cancer after 43 years of marriage and was learning to rebuild her life the same way I was learning to rebuild mine. We started having coffee after the meetings, then dinner occasionally, then something that resembled dating despite both of us being in our 60s. Ellen knew I had been married before, knew my ex-wife had had an affair that ended our marriage. She didn't know about David, and I never planned to tell her. Some stories were too complicated to share, even with someone you were learning to love again. But Ellen understood loss and forgiveness in ways that helped me process my own pain. She helped me see that choosing to protect David from the truth wasn't just about him. It was about choosing compassion over revenge, healing over bitterness. "You could have destroyed that young man's life," she said one evening as we walked along the riverfront near my apartment. You could have told him the truth and watched him fall apart. Instead, you chose to carry that burden yourself so he could be free of it. That takes real love. Sometimes love means letting go, I said. Sometimes it does. On David's 30th birthday, I did something I'd never done before. I wrote him a letter I actually intended to send, not revealing the truth, but acknowledging the connection I felt to him and the pride I had in watching him build a meaningful life. The letter was simple. David, I hope you don't mind hearing from me. I've been following your organization's work through the news, and I wanted you to know how impressed I am with what you've built. What you're doing for adoptees and their families is truly important. I wanted you to know that your birth mother, wherever she is, would be incredibly proud of the man you've become. You've taken your pain and turned it into a force for good in the world. That's not something everyone can do. I hope you continue to find peace and purpose in your life. The world is a better place with you in it. With admiration, Bruce. I mailed the letter and then waited nervously for a response that never came. Maybe David had thrown it away without reading it. Maybe he had read it but decided not to respond. Either way, I had said what I needed to say. 3 months later, I received a card in the mail with a simple message. Bruce, thank you for your letter. Your words meant more to me than you probably realize. I hope you've found peace too. David P.S. I kept your phone number from when you called the hospital. If you ever want that coffee, the invitation still stands. I kept that card on my refrigerator for 6 months before finally putting it away in the folder with everything else about David's life. The invitation was tempting, but I knew myself well enough to know that one coffee would lead to wanting more contact, and more contact would eventually lead to wanting to tell him the truth. Some gifts require sacrifice. The gift I gave David was the peace of not knowing that he had been intimate with his biological mother. The gift he gave me was the knowledge that my son had grown up to be a good man despite all the lies and abandonment that had shaped his early life. Now at 65, I live quietly in my apartment overlooking the river. I have my work, my relationship with Ellen, my weekly calls with Sarah. I have a grandson who visits sometimes and reminds me that life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. And I have a son I watch from a distance, proud of his successes, worried about his struggles, loving him in the only way I can, silently and completely, like a guardian angel he will never know exists. Sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing not to act at all. Sometimes the most profound relationship is one that exists entirely in your own heart. I made my peace with that choice long ago, and I've never regretted it. David is free to build his life without the weight of our family's complicated history. Margaret is starting over in Arizona, trying to find forgiveness for herself. And I am learning that liberation sometimes comes not from claiming what you think you deserve, but from protecting someone else's peace at the cost of your own desires. It's not the ending I would have written for our story, but it's the right one, and that's enough.